Hey everyone, Pete Calandra here. What you just heard was an excerpt from a track I composed featuring a new bundle of instruments from Spitfire Audio. It's all from their Originals library, and they're calling it Originals Orchestra, a cinematic orchestral starter pack. What their concept is here is to give people just getting started with writing orchestral music, or maybe even people who have a laptop with limited resources, or students, anybody who want to get into writing orchestral music, it will give them the tools to do that at a reasonable price point. It features 5 of their Originals libraries and has winds, brass, percussion, strings, pads, and piano. For more details on this library and for the cost, you can check out the link in the description box below. Just a little disclaimer here. Spitfire did reach out to me and asked me to create a demo and a video for this, but I already owned all of these libraries in advance of that. They've had no say in the content of this video. What I'd like to do is play the piece in its entirety and then come back on the other side and do a breakdown and just run through all the different instruments and combinations that I've used. If you like this video, give a thumbs up. For more content, please subscribe, and to be notified, ring that bell. Thank you so much for watching, and let's get right into it. All right, so this is my Pro Tools session for that piece, and a little bit of the Lalo Schifrin, Henry Mancini towards the end, and some ethereal stuff at the beginning. I've got this track color coordinated. The top level are my winds. The green tracks are my horns, my brass. This yellowish, goldish tracks are my orchestral percussion. These teal or aqua tracks, these are my pitched percussion, and these are from the BBC SO Discovery Orchestra. And there's a couple of wind and one brass track where I've used the BBC to supplement, and I'll get through that as we do a detailed breakdown of the piece. Then I've got, with this blue track, the Firewood piano. I've got 2 of them. And then right here we've got pads, the red tracks, and then below that the purplish ones are my strings. I've got, let's see, how many tracks? So there's 49 tracks here. There's some VCA master tracks I use to separate out the different sections. So let's say there's about 44 instrument tracks on this, or 43. In order for me to do this with individual instruments, I'd probably be looking at close to 100 tracks. So it's economical in that fashion. So let me play a little bit of this, and I will turn off my vocal mic so you can hear it better. My goal here was to create something that was atmospheric and ethereal, and where the ideas sort of developed and they overlapped with the next bit, right? So sort of this continual circular unfolding. And the way I achieved that, and let me make everything bigger, is I started off with some of these beautiful pads. So now if I use my VCA, I can solo these pads. So here you've got a perfect example of pyramiding, right? I start off with just this sound first. Then at measure 3, the second sound, this track here, comes in. You can hear that lower octave. And then right here, the third track comes in. Then we'll have the fourth and the fifth track. So that really works well for me. And also what I like is the building density, right? So I start off with a single note, single note, single note, then a chord, and then another chord. And it's really, I love that. And what you might have noticed is that this sound is playing, but you don't hear it. So we can just go to Controllers, Mod Wheel, and you'll see that there's copious amounts of automation with the dynamics here. Now, while these are pyramiding down here, we also have the harp that comes in here. And then after that, we have this tam, right, or a gong. And then above that, you'll see that we've got notes played by the oboes and the horns. So let's do this. I think I'll leave the automation up. You can still see the notes. So we've got the horn coming in. Now, what might be nice on this particular sound would be to take, let's say, a one-band EQ, since I want that to be mellow, and put a low-pass filter in, and then after that, add some more reverb to get back what you've cut down by doing this. But right, and then you can automate that to make that brighter. I've gone over that in other videos, so those of you that have watched my tutorial videos, you've seen me do that with these to add some more dynamics and depth to the sound. And the oboe, doubling the French horn. Right, so that's really nice. The really rich, harmonically dense oboe sound really adds a nice layer to the French horns. So let's listen to the aggregate of everything so far. As that little subsection is ending, The dynamics come down a little bit. Right, the texture in the pads goes from high-pitched stuff to sort of stuff in the mid-range. And then the oboe and the horn go to the highest note that they're going to play right now. I've got this sort of sound effect with the earthquake percussion. It's very subtle. It takes a second to hear it. It's just this low rumble. And then as this is quietly rumbling, there's also a lower brass note that comes in and fades in that sort of dovetails with these notes here. Our harp is continuing with that pattern. The celeste comes in. Also doing some dynamics with that. And you'll see down here, this is our celeste. Right here, it's sort of playing out of time. And then above that, we have a similar pattern in the woodwinds, the high woodwinds. You hear they're doubling. And then above that, the short, high woodwinds is doubling the celeste, which gives us a very nice aggregate sound. And that sort of takes over as the harp dies out. And here we've got a nice little melodic figure in the high winds. I doubled the celeste and winds with this celestial stops pad, which opened the piece. That adds a beautiful shine to the sound, right? So if we aggregate together the harp, the celeste, and the winds, right? It's a beautiful aggregate sound. It really adds to the atmosphere. And then there's a low note in the Firewood piano. Very subtle. Also doubling the winds with this glacial marimba pad for the melodic content. The reason I'm doing that is not just to give the atmosphere or the atmospheric element to the melodic content, which goes in really beautifully with the rest of this section, but it's also to help mask the fact that the woodwinds that are playing long notes are just long notes. They're not legato. So you don't notice that as much when you hear the two of these played together, and that's a long time MIDI technique. And you'll also notice I left a breath here. A lot of my students don't do that. Please do that. And then what else? And we're doubling it with the strings. And at some point, we've got this octave low strings coming in. Going in opposite motion from pretty much from the melodic content. But also what I did, since that fades in, I helped to give it a little point with the Firewood piano. Okay, great. So let's move forward from here and see what we've got. And you can hear how the texture thins out in this area here as it starts to transition into another little subsection here. At this point, what I'd like to start doing is transitioning away from the opening, which unfolds very slowly, is very harmonically static, into the next section that has a lot of rhythm with very dense chords. And the way that I do this is to have these really nice chords played in the concertino strings. Let me get to those. And they work nicely under this long note in the melodic area. Above that, we've got the Discovery piccolo playing another melodic figure that dovetails with the previous figure. I've played it in a lower register, and when you play piccolo in a lower register, it almost sounds like a folk instrument. It's really interesting how that happens. Then while that's occurring, the Firewood piano comes in and plays a very haunting little melodic figure, again drenched with the built-in reverb from Pro Tools. Again, staying with the economy plugins. As that little bit is fading out, I'm just have this little toy here sound from the BBC untuned percussion. That leads us to this next bit where I've got the cinematic percussion with a couple of instances of the BBC SO Discovery. And I'll solo the percussion. We can take a listen to that. Now, as all of you probably know by now, hopefully, there's been plenty of tutorials on YouTube about it. My lower pitched instruments are doing accents, right? Boom, do-do-dum, do-do-dum, dum, da-gum, ba-dum. And then the speedy stuff is being played with the higher pitched instruments, like the snares. And these are velocity sensitive, so you can get some really nice dynamics with that. And I'm using tams and cymbals to help accent. So with that, we have our low winds starting us off. So we had the high winds playing the dee-dee-dee-dee-dee-dee-doom, doubled by the Glock. You can hear that. Now, one thing I will say is that rhythmically, these are not super tight. And maybe I can go in here and turn up the tightness and make it a little bit snappier to the beat. You see that? How that's not so loose. It's a little bit more rhythmically accurate because I've chopped into the sample start a little bit. So I'm glad they give you that functionality. And then when this high winds bit here enters in. The second time it's in octaves. The first time it's in unison. And then the second time through, I believe, we've got some pizzicato strings accenting the bassoon. So. And here, if I wanted to, I could separate that out into 2 tracks, get the high pizzicato strings onto another track for mixing, but that's, I didn't feel the need to do that. Again, the arrangement unfolds, I'm building. Every time through it's a little different, and all these little details add up to making a really good arrangement. Now here, just so that you could see what I've done here with the brass, this is just standard jazz chord voicings for a sharp 9. I've got E and G sharp, D and G natural. So those are just the tones that I need. I don't need the 5th of the chords. I've got root, 3rd, 7th, and sharp 9. And that ends up sounding like this. This section basically takes that one chord voicing and moves it in stepwise or half-step motion. That works out really well. And to fill out our chords and give us some nice richness in the low ends, I've got the pizzicato strings and the low woodwinds. Then the next thing I do is I add the Glock, doubling the top note. Something like this sort of gives us a marching band feel. You know, it's almost like a marching big band or Lalo Schifrin-esque. I really like that sound. And then for some punch, I add the xylophone. And the marimba. So let's just solo our tuned percussion. And I'm only playing the upper structure here of those chords, not the whole chord. You don't need that. Now at measure 37 here, we've got this little figure in the strings. And again, with this, I did bring up the tightness. It's still a little bit rhythmically inaccurate, but that's okay. I don't mind it. It kind of helps with the humanity of it all. The first time through with that melody, it's not doubled. The second time through, I add short piccolos and short winds high. So let's listen to just the aggregate of that when it comes in the second time. So the piccolo is giving us, you know, the octave above, adding a nice shine to it, and that really works nicely with the bells. So if I go down here to my Glock, you hear how they're almost doing a duet above all the other instruments pitch-wise. Then after the second iteration of that melodic figure in the strings and winds, it's not a stop time because the rhythm keeps going, but there's a break and a descending fill in the strings, piccolo, and high short winds. And then this figure here leads us to the end with these big brass and high short wind accents. It's really sort of the high point of the whole thing. Now, one thing I do that I want to talk about with the brass is I change the voicing a little bit. Right, I make a suspended chord here with the top two voices. And here I've got the same low note, and I change the top 3 voices. So that's kind of cool. Just change things up a little bit. Play around, you experiment with it. And then after that section's over, there's sort of a recap of the opening where you have a very atmospheric ending. With some noodling on the Firewood piano and some of those pads coming back in. Okay, so that's a look at composing using Spitfire Audio's original orchestra bundle. So what do I think of this? I think for certain use cases and for the intended use by the company, this works out really well. If you're a student, if you're a hobbyist, if you're somebody who's on a limited budget, if you've got a computer with limited resources and you want to write orchestral music, you can certainly get stuff that sounds very good to excellent using this library, especially if you supplement it with something like the BBC SO Discover, which is also free. You can add all those pitched percussion instruments and things like tambourines and shakers and castanets that really help drive some of the percussion sections. So for certain use cases, this is really an excellent option. That's my opinion about this, and I can recommend it as such. Will it replace my full orchestra sample libraries? No, but that's not what it's meant for. For what it's meant for, it does an excellent job. Anyway, I hope you've enjoyed this video. I've been Pete Calandra. Leave any comments down below. I'd love to hear what you think of this. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll catch you on the next one.